How do you see alternative giving methods show up among aging donors? And then how does that intersect with footsteps and faith?
Monthly donors that are making additional one-time gifts, both through their IRA and DEF. We're seeing people that are giving monthly through their DEFs. We're seeing donors that have been giving monthly for years and years. They are then switching to giving a lump sum, honoring the relationship that they've already established with CRS as a monthly donor, their commitment. And then how do we ensure when they move into this new phase of giving, this new channel of giving, that we're appropriately communicating to them, that we're stewarding them, and that we're recognizing that they've already been with us for XYZ years.
Erin Shuler, welcome to the Sustainable Giving Podcast.
Hi, Dave. It's so good to be here.
I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because we're going to do something a little bit different for our listeners. We're actually going to use your monthly giving program called Footsteps in Faith, which is the monthly giving program for Catholic Relief Services, as a real world case study for a question that I think a lot of nonprofit leaders are wrestling with. And that is, what does a mature monthly giving program need next? And you and I had a chance to talk a little bit. We actually met a year ago briefly in a conversation around monthly giving. And so I think this is going to be a fun conversation. And really, so much of the conversation about recurring giving focuses on starting something new, right? A lot of our conversations are, we didn't have a thing or we had a thing, but it wasn't really much. But today's conversation is really about a program that's been around in some ways for decades, right, Aaron?
Yep. Yeah. CRS's Footsteps and Faith program has been around in different forms for over 30 years. And Catholic Relief Services is going on over 80 years of work around the world.
Yeah. And I always say that I've never met a nonprofit to date that doesn't have recurring giving, right? Every nonprofit has some number of donors who have decided to give on a recurring basis. But you all, the program itself has been around for quite a while. You have a long history of humanitarian work around the world, and you're stewarding something that really has history, loyalty, complexity, and also opportunity. And so the question I want our listeners to be thinking about it through this conversation is, what does the next stage of growth look like when a monthly giving program is already mature? Before we dive into that, though, Aaron, I would love to just hear a little bit about where your journey intersects Catholic Relief Services. How did you get into this work? And just tell me a little bit about your own path.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I was just always drawn to mission-driven work. From a young age, my parents really fostered in us, a sense of service, a sense of giving back. And that was just something that was ingrained in our lives, in our church, in our schools, in our communities. And so that's something that has been part of my life. And I had an opportunity when I was in college to spend a couple months in El Salvador. And I just had an incredible experience really learning about, a different part of the world, different needs. And um, I came back and I actually had the opportunity to meet a Sierra staff member at a conference and learning more about the work of the global church, about what Catholic Relief Services does, just left me so inspired. Fast forward a few years, I find myself at CRS. I had, really desired to work there, and I came in. I've been there for 13 years now, and for the last about 5 years, I've been working on our monthly giving program.
Isn't it amazing when you realize that you can actually do this as a job? Like, I don't know about you, but I remember
Yeah.
thinking, no, yeah, you need to go on a missions trip or you got to volunteer at the local charity. And that's how you feel good about your impact. But the fact that you can have an actual career in this space, it still blows my mind.
Yeah, and it's been so fun. CRS is so big. We work in over 90 countries around the world, and it's just been an incredible opportunity to learn about our work, but also to grow professionally, to be able to work in different areas of the organization. And the fundraising space has been incredible, learning about our donors, about their commitment, and just about their faith and their commitment to this work.
I love that. So what was the point at which you where monthly giving or recurring giving became a bigger part of your focus?
Yeah, so, about 5 years ago, CRS looked at our fundraising work, and they really saw, some peers that were also carving out a specific position for someone to focus on the recurring giving program. So prior to that, lots of people had their hands on the program, right? But there wasn't necessarily one person steering the ship. And so they created a position, and I came from another side of the organization working, on US outreach, and all hands in, learning
Mhm.
more about all of our donors and our work, and it's been so fun. I mean, I am, yes, one person, but I also, work with so many people that are so strategic and so incredibly smart to really help, this program continue to grow, to evolve, and just to run really well.
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about in the book and I've talked about with as we work with organizations is, who's that one person that feels
Mm.
I did a client of mine said this I cut years ago, their CEO used to say, "Who's sleeping on the cot?" And I was like, "Well, one, I don't know the work-life balance. We should be sleeping on a cot, but I get the
Sure.
metaphor, which is like, who feels personally responsible for this thing, even if there's no one person that can own it? Because
Mm.
more often than not, I see your leadership saw 5 years ago, which is like, okay, maybe everybody's responsible, but that also means no one's responsible, and so the fact that you've taken that on, I think is so critical. Um, so for listeners who may not know the history though, talk a little bit about Footsteps in Faith. How long has monthly giving been a part of the CRS story? How's it and then how it's evolved kind of in the more recent years?
Yeah, so, our monthly giving program has been or monthly giving programs, I should say, have been around for over 30 years. So that was obviously before, I came to CRS, and, there were, various programs to provide recurring giving options for donors. Over the years, those essentially have been consolidated into our flagship program, Footsteps in Faith. So I think there was a lot of learning, a lot of, testing, experimenting, seeing how different things worked, and we've landed on Footsteps in Faith being, our general program. Looking back, there were, programs that were specifically around microfinance, very specific types of monthly giving programs, and we've learned, that people really like kind of this broader program. It really helps us to be able to respond to emergencies, and so that's kind of where we've landed now. But it's incredible that our monthly giving program has been around this long.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about many different programs, and it's really hard to say. It is very situational, but I think more often than not, both for donors and frankly for nonprofits to have a essentially what is a general fund program that specifically funds the types of things that the charity is focused on is the way to go. I can think of some organizations, but it's more a rare exception where having a really um, tightly designated kind of special recurring giving program makes sense. So it makes sense that you've generally found yourself in that broader space. When you stepped into the more focused role with monthly donors, what did you begin to notice? Like, so you said, was it 5 years ago?
Yeah, about 5 years ago.
Okay, so just to kind of give me the fast track version of like, okay, no one person was really responsible. What did that
Right.
look like?
Yeah, it was a matter of really taking a look at the donor journey. That was one of the first things that I did. So every different team had touch points with our sustainers, with our monthly donors. And I came in and I really took a look at what everyone was getting and kind of the holistic picture, really, because that's what we were missing, right? We were missing having one person take a look at everything, all the touch points, because it was
Mhm.
all broken apart, between different teams, and it was running well, but having one person really, like, pull everything together has allowed us to really be more strategic, refine things more, and, really, again, to that ship metaphor, to steer the ship in, a more strategic direction.
Yeah. Well, and that I think that's a perfect bridging to this conversation about maturity. Maturity is such a nice word, right? But sometimes it means it can be hard, right? Because you build these programs, they get to a certain level, and then you're just dealing with frankly, the economics of what happens with any fundraising program. I was just talking to a nonprofit leader earlier today, and it's like, she said to me, she said, "I feel like we're just treading water because we got to a certain size and we're bringing in new donors." Like if I just look at the not the net new number, I look at the new sustainer number, it's incredible. Like it's a wonderful number. But then when you look at the net new, right, after churn, it's a different picture, right? And so I think maturity is both an asset, but it also can be a challenge. And so let's kind of dive in there because I think when a program has existed in some form for decades, what are some of the advantages you see from that maturity? But also, let's real talk. What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, so I think one of the first advantages is just the scale that we've been able to amass is incredible, and we have donors that have been with us for, 10, 15, 20, even 25 years, which just is incredible that these people have been giving consistently for that long. So in some ways, this is a huge advantage. We have people that have been with us for so long and can share insight. That said, also amassing, a good size of donors really allows us, going back to the emergency example, when there's an emergency, when we need to be able to have funds to support a project immediately, this money is there for us to be able to do that. And so those are two big advantages here, just like the longevity and commitment of our donors, and the resources that they provide. I think something else that is a interesting advantage for us is that because of the length of this program and what we've been able to gather on the data side, it gives us a lot of learnings, right? We have streamlined our communications both on the mail side and on the digital side. That is always evolving, but I think we've gotten to like a really good place to do a lot of streamlining and know what donors want. Um, Obviously, we're never perfect, but I do think that's another advantage to, more mature program.
Mhm.
And then on the flip side, with a program this size, it is really hard to do more of that one-on-one outreach. That's something we're always talking about, always trying to figure out how to really have more of those personal connections with donors, making sure that we're sharing with them, the right stories. We work all over the world, and we have incredible stories, and really trying to get them, what they want to hear as well, is a really big important part.
Yeah. Well, and do you find, I mean, I don't, and we can get into this as we go, but are there specific channels? I know some organizations, they really see a pretty significant growth in one channel, and that's like their big growth engine. What does that mix look like for you guys?
Yeah, for a long time it was mail, right? Tried and true. We saw a lot of great acquisition through our mail programs, and that has really shifted over the last couple of years to digital, in terms of acquiring new donors. And so that's kind of where we are now, really taking a look at our digital even more and figuring out ways to bring in more people.
Yeah. What do you think about when it comes to this kind of honoring the history of the program, but also asking the question of what needs to change? Sometimes you have these rich histories and they can
Mhm.
become, I don't want to say sacred cows, that's a little too overdone, but like, how do you challenge the sort of status quo?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for our longtime donors, having that consistency is really important. And when it comes to people that are coming in on the newer side, how can we segment them and give them, maybe something a little bit different than some people that have been around for a longer period of time? And I think our team does a good job in different ways of, especially when donors have been with us for, 15, 20, 25 years, stewarding them with communications that are more geared towards plan giving,
Mhm.
towards giving in new and different ways. And so that's something that we've definitely been figuring out as we go, because that has shifted as our donors have aged with us as well.
Yeah. When I think about how organizations like yours, you do a lot of relief work. Um, every organization has a different funding mix. And like many international humanitarian organizations, you've had to navigate significant shifts in the funding environment. We work with a number of organizations that saw significant cuts in government funding and government grants. So without getting into anything too in the details or in the weeds, how has this season shaped the way leadership thinks about sustainable donor revenue?
Yeah, Dave, last year was really hard for us, and a lot of other organizations in this space. We lost a significant amount of funding, and it was incredible to see the way donors stepped up. There was one donor in particular, she wrote in and said that, she saw what was happening. She had never heard of CRS before. She looked us up and she goes, "I saw what you guys were doing and I had to join. It was an absolute necessity."
Mm,
And I think that quote just like really spoke to the time, to what was happening, and just to this desire from people that wanted to do something to help. They saw the scale, they saw so many lives being impacted, and people really came out, and we saw a really great number of monthly donors, you know,
mhm.
join our program. So, in terms of leadership, they are so supportive of us continuing to grow this program. They see the value of it, and these donors are incredible.
Talk about the internal conversation because I've been in some of those rooms, right, where you're like, hello, how are we going to make this work, right? There's some version of a of crisis even at times. Like, how does the internal conversation go, or how did the internal conversation go, or how has it gone internally? Like, is there a sense of urgency? What is that? What is that like?
Yeah, last year, as part of our Save Lives campaign, in response to the funding loss, a big portion of that was, yes, one-time emergency, but we also were very strategic in asking for monthly donations and really trying to communicate to people the importance of that long-term commitment. So, one-time gifts are great, and we need those during like key emergencies, but we also need that sustainable revenue. We need people giving month after month so that we can be there when an emergency strikes, so that we can be there, after a couple months or, even years. And then even that long term commitment. Like, we don't just come into an emergency and stay. We are there to make sure that the infrastructure is ready so that people can thrive in the long term as well. And so what that looks like, for us, that looked like a little bit of shifting of our like larger budget to make sure that we were adequately investing in our sustainer initiatives. And so again, that was a strategic decision that we made, especially over the last couple of years, to make sure that we were continuing to invest in the sustainer program, not just with a position that was specifically looking at it, but that we were continuing to increase investment in this particular channel.
Yeah. When I think about the number of organizations that for which they don't think twice about allocating resources, which is people, budget, et cetera, for their their direct marketing or broad based program, digital, plan giving, the major gifts team. But so often I found for a lot of organizations that recurring sustainable giving is just does there's not like oh yeah, that's the line item in the budget for that, right? It's like, well, shouldn't that just be growing almost on its own? It reminds me of the early days of digital fundraising. I remember when I first started doing digital fundraising, I was like,
Sure.
what does that even mean? We called it new media. And people's, this is a little oversimplified, but the general sort of feeling was like, well, I have a website. What do you mean? Like, I built a website that cost me money, or maybe it didn't because their cousin built it, right? But but this idea that you would actually invest, you would set aside budget within the organization's budget to actually invest in your what we called then new media fundraising was like, no, it just should come in, right? And eventually, and this is the piece that makes me really optimistic. Eventually, organizations realize like, oh no, wait, actually, if we actually invest in this, build out strategies, be more strategic, communicate, resource this appropriately, then we can actually grow it even faster. And the net income that actually goes to program to actually doing the work that our mission calls us to do, then becomes that much more effective. But I do think organizations, even frankly, some large ones, we work with organizations that have very large, 8 figure recurring giving budgets. And I think they're just starting to realize like, oh, actually we can make this thing grow so much more if we invest in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so do you think, it's so interesting thinking about these moments of disruption, especially for a relief organization, which like specializes from its history in disruption. But then when you get disrupted, that's a little bit interesting. Um,
Absolutely.
do you think moments of disruption change the internal conversation around monthly giving?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said before, our monthly donors, the resources that we receive from them were able to allow us to carry out programming during that time of immense disruption. And I think, we have taken a hard look internally just at our whole organization. The disruption, impacted every single part of CRS. And moving forward, we know that sustainable giving is going to continue to need to be such an important element to our fundraising work. As again, leadership saw years ago, but as we continue to see because of these external shifts.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, I think about that. I've talked about it as the January 1st problem, but in your case, well, it happened to be around January that a lot of those funding cuts started to happen. But the just how it changes how people think about donor funded revenue and like the role that it can play in those seasons where other funding streams aren't as predictable. But let's talk a little bit about the donor side of the equation here, because I think it's clear that recurring giving is great for nonprofits because it's more stable, solves for the January 1st problem, allows them to actually make strategic decisions and long-term plans that create impact. But it's also good for donors. And so one of the things that stood out to me in our little conversation we had prior to recording was how warmly you talked about your donors. How would you describe the footsteps in faith donor?
Yeah, so kind of like I shared earlier, we have donors that have been with us for years, some of them decades, and we hear from them and they're just so grateful for the updates that we provide. They're so grateful to be part of something bigger, and I think that's a really unique element to our work. So as a Catholic organization, we are inspired by our faith, and I think a lot of people come to us as well because they want to live out their faith. They want to live out something bigger than themselves, and I just hear amazing stories from our donors all the time. People that are really giving, as much as they can, people that are giving, from like really hard spots too. And so these are just really committed donors who want to support the poor and want to be able to live out their faith in this unique way. And so I really see us as a conduit to that, right? A way for people to live out their faith in this world and to be able to serve those that are in the greatest need. And I think that's just a beautiful mission and a beautiful, task that we've been asked to do.
Yeah. I think about a friend of mine recently shared a story that he got a chance. He was involved with kind of marketing ad agency work, and he had a chance years and years ago to actually be on set, so to speak. They did a video with Mother Teresa, and he talked about how they were like, "Oh my gosh, we have one shot. We got to get this. This is going to be great." So he's thinking about it as a professional, right? And so they had like extra crew and everything all around. And I guess one of the other nuns came to him and said, "Hey, this is a little overdone. Like she's a little nervous." And he was like, "Okay, let's not make a big deal about this or whatever." And just the moment I think about the name of your program, like Footsteps in Faith, and he talked about this moment of realizing, she wasn't wearing shoes somehow, just that
Mhm.
humility. But I also think of the donors who have walked in those footsteps, metaphorically and or literally, right? And they've been there. They've been there for the long term. They see it as an act of faithfulness, that is a part of expressing who they are, both as a person of faith in this case, but also as a person who cares deeply about a cause. That's powerful. There's a generosity crisis in North America. The number of individuals giving to charity is on the decline. And for nonprofits that rely on the generosity of everyday people, this is an alarming and discouraging statistic. But amidst these challenges, a new opportunity has emerged. The subscription economy is transforming behavior. It started with the way we consume and it is now transforming the way we give. The subscription economy has changed everything. In the rise of sustainable giving, I share core elements to building a thriving, sustainable giving program, including 6 key shifts driven by the subscription economy, understanding donor motivation, crafting an ongoing value proposition, getting your technology stack right, designing your program, and growing recurring giving. Recurring giving is now more accessible to more charities than at any time in history. The question is, are you going to take advantage of it? How do you think about, and I don't know if you think about this, so the answer may be, no, we don't think about this, but I always think about how do we humanize the impact. I think a lot of times, regardless of what our charity does, it can be super easy to focus on the mechanics of what we do. We distribute supplies, or we fly things around the world, or we build, infrastructure, or we, tackle progress change, or whatever, right? But we kind of forget the humans in that. How do you think about that? How does facilitating a human to human connection look like, at least from your
Yeah.
perspective?
When, I read through comments or hear from donors, that's, like, one of my favorite things to hear from our donors, to hear what we're doing well, to hear areas that we can fix with the program, and I reached out to a donor who had canceled their gift. We didn't have a reason why, so I was just doing, some outreach, and the family wrote back and they said, "We have been Footsteps and Faith supporters for years. We love CRS. We, have really been tight with things because of the economy lately. And we sat down, we took a look at our budget, and we realized that we had been pulling our money from our savings to make donations every month." And so
Mm.
that's just like one example, again, going back to the amazing donors that we have. But realizing too that these are people that want to support. They're also being impacted by what's happening in the world, and just giving them grace, right? And letting them know like how much we appreciate them and how much like their support over the years meant so much to us. And that, we'll be here when they want to come back.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a big piece of this too, supporting our donors in whatever, phase that they are in.
Well, I think about the human side of retention, and there's really two topics here. I do want to talk in a minute about kind of aging donors and even different giving vehicles. Put a pin in that for a second, though.
Yeah.
But to your point about your story just now, some donors do get to that point where they need to pause or cancel or shift how they give, not typically because they stopped caring, but because their circumstances are changed. So talk a
Yeah.
little bit about how you think about that.
Yeah, we really try to make an effort to steward our donors as best we can, especially when, these kinds of things come up. They need to cancel, they need to pause. I think it's an area that we can really improve on as well. Um, you know, Making sure that we're communicating to them as best as possible. But, a lot of things happen. We get a lot of comments from people that, the financial situation right now, the economy, and we just try our best to make sure that they know how much we appreciate them. I think that's kind of like the resounding thing I'd want for others to know as well, like that we try to let our donors know how much we appreciate even if it was just a short amount of time that they were with us because they made an impact through their monthly gifts.
That's so good. Well, I just spoke to a group of national food banks, for example, on this topic. And one of the main things they wanted to talk about was what does stewardship and retention look like? Both from just a holistic donor care perspective, but also, frankly, because there have been some disasters in their world too. And they've had a lot of new donors step up. So, what does it look like to care for them, to retain them, right? And we talked about a couple things. We talked about how do we affirm our donors on an ongoing basis. That's one of the pieces I think charities, they're hopefully pretty good about it initially, like, "Thank you so much,
Mhm.
you've made a difference." But these are ongoing monthly donors, so when they get to month
Yeah.
2 and month 10 and, year 10, like, how are we on, affirming them on an ongoing basis? And
Yeah, I think for us, going back to, just being a mature program and, all the people that even went before me that were helping with what people received in the mail, what our monthly donors received on the digital side. We are just so intentional about what stories we share with them, what communications they get, whether it's updated newsletters, quarterly newsletters about the work, monthly emails about emergencies. There's just so much going on, and being able to share with them how the church is serving is something that we just are so passionate about and is so important to our work. Something really special that I know a lot of organizations do that we do as well is really honoring anniversaries. So honoring 1, 5, 10-year anniversaries digitally and sending them digital updates. And what I think, again, going back to long-term investment and long-term support, we're able to tell those stories of what a family experienced 10 years ago and
yeah.
continuing to have documentation and updates about where they are now. Once they get past those that initial decade, then they receive a handwritten card. So when they hit more of those higher years, so just again, appreciating and recognizing these people for all that they're doing.
Well, we talk about that one that just creates powerful moments, and when I speak about
Yeah.
powerful moments, and I'm totally stealing from authors Dan and Chip Heath that wrote a book called The Power of Moments. So for our listeners who are interested, they talk about that, there's four types of moments that we're wired to remember. And one of those types of moments, the four are, um, well, the one that I'm thinking about specifically is milestones. Like, how do we mark
Mm,
milestones? The others are transitions, and then peaks, like the highest of high moments, and pits, like the lowest of low moments. Those are the four:
mm,
peaks, pits, milestones, and transitions. So I always say, how can we elevate the peaks? How can we flip the pits and turn those worst experiences into
yeah.
great ones? What can we do to mark the milestones and celebrate the transitions? And so I love the fact that you think about doing that. Let's talk about, we talked about aging donors, it's so funny to me, and I think not fundraisers get this. So they're like, "Just so you know, Dave, our donors are older." And I'm like, "I've been doing fundraising for 22 years. I think that's partly just called life stage, but also history of organizations." That being said, we have both an aging donor population and, just frankly, an increase in the wealth transfer and these different kind of financial instruments that exist today that didn't exist, even some number of years ago. So I want to explore a little bit the rise of some of these, other alternative giving types, the QCDs or the donor advised funds, gifts from IRA. How do you, as you think about your donor base, like, how do you see alternative giving methods show up among aging donors? And then how does that intersect with footsteps and faith? Are you still trying to figure
Yeah.
that out? What does that look like for you all?
Uh, it's a great question, Dave, and both, both
Yeah.
and. So, first, I'll share what we're seeing. So, we're seeing our monthly donors that are making additional one-time gifts, both through their IRA and DEF. We're seeing people that are giving monthly through their DEFs. And then we're seeing donors that have been giving monthly for, years and years. They've hit their specific age and they are opting out of the traditional our traditional monthly giving program, and they are then switching to giving a lump sum via an IRA or a DAF. So for
Mhm.
example, we've seen donors that are, giving $100 a month through Footstep and Faith, and then they transition to giving $1,200 a month through their IRA. And so these are a couple of different areas that we've identified, and we're very much exploring, going back to stewardship. How do we then steward these donors appropriately? I think the biggest thing that we have for consideration here is honoring the relationship that they've already established with CRS as a monthly donor, their commitment, and then how do we ensure when they move into this new phase of giving, this new
Mhm.
channel of giving, that we're appropriately communicating to them, that we're stewarding them, and that we're recognizing that they've already been with us for XYZ years. So I think this is a really
Mhm.
big area that, we have a lot of research, we have a lot of information, and it's just really refining it.
Yeah. Honoring their commitment. You know, I don't have a strong opinion on this yet, but, it's like I've often said, in your case, it's footsteps in faith. Like, hey, if they're a faithful donor, whether or not it's an automated DAF gift or a credit card gift, like why wouldn't we still call them a footsteps in faith donor or whatever? And I don't know how you think about that, but especially donor advised funds these days. This percentage I was talking to Mitch Stein, we had him on the show this last season. Mitch Stein, by the way, is the head of communications at an organization called Chariot. They're doing a lot of helping donor advised funds be more easily distributed, frankly,
Yeah,
through
I
implementation.
watched the episode. It was great.
Oh, so it's such a fun
Yeah,
conversation. But looking at some of the data, and it's hard to kind of know, but multiple of the donor advised fund kind of foundations will report on the data. I think the percentage I saw was between 30 and 40% of donor advised fund gifts are automated. So they're actual recurring gifts. They
right,
just are not coming out of a checking account or a credit card, right? And so
right.
it's like, hey, it's faithful giving, and it's what works for the donor.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we're trying to, for us at CRS, really specifically figure out is someone that's giving through a DAF 12 times a year, do they continue to get the communications that a monthly donor gets, or do we refine that communication in a little bit of a different way? So that's something we're wrestling with right now.
Yeah, no, that's good. Hey, okay, so I wanted to leave some time. I've got one or two more questions, but I
Okay.
also said, hey, Aaron, this is a bit of kind of like a little bit of a live, sort of advisory conversation, like I might have with a client. And so I asked you if you had one or two kind of strategic questions. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. I want to ask you one more question, specifically on growth, and really growing the file through donor conversion. There's two ways to grow a file. One is to invite people in recurring giving, and one is to invite them to give to a recurring gift right from first gift. And that's wonderful. And if you can do that, and many organizations do really well with that. But also, I would say a slight majority of charities, in my experience, grow their file predominantly through single gift donors who then convert or choose to then become a recurring donor. It sounds like you've done a lot over the years to invite existing donors into monthly giving. What's worked well on the conversion side for you?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is making our monthly donor program known to our current donors. So we have it on everything. It sounds so simple. We make it, a little ad on the back of a newsletter. We add a checkbox. I know a lot of organizations are doing this too. We add checkboxes to letters. We do email invites. I would I would say that our donors, our one-time donors, um, get to see our monthly giving option in various communications, and so we really just try to make it known. And again, the biggest thing here is just really, stressing the importance of that long-term value, that sustainable giving, and how it is so important just for all of the work that we do. The emergency one-time response is great, having one-time donations is fantastic, but that long-term commitment that we're able to provide to communities around the world, is a huge part of why we need these monthly gifts.
Love it. Love it. Well, hey, let's kind of turn the tables here. I would love to hear from you. I said, hey, what's one or two couple strategic questions? Like, this is kind of a live working session as far as I'm concerned. Like, what are you thinking about? What are you generally genuinely wrestling with as you think about this next chapter of Footsteps in Faith?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you, being willing and open to me tossing some your way. One of the things that we've kind of hit on a little bit, but that I figured was a good question as well was, how do we intentionally design a donor journey that doesn't just lead to a monthly gift, but then evolves with the donors over time? So especially, as their capacity, life stage, and even preferred way of giving change. So like what does that donor journey look like from the start? So I think that's something that we would love to dig into a
Yeah.
little bit more.
And you're thinking not just sort of the donor journey in terms of what we do in the first calendar year, but like, oh, these
Right.
are people who've been with us faithfully. That they've given for 30 years. Maybe they've had a couple different names and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, or even just people coming in, like what the donor journey looks like for someone coming in and
Yeah.
wanting to have that holistic cycle.
Yeah. I think the couple things come to mind as I think about, as donors come in, we want to, and we did, yeah, I hinted at one of those, which is we want to affirm them and we want to, and that goes beyond, a timely receipt, hopefully it's some version of a recognition that they are a new donor or a new to monthly donor. They're a donor that's been faithful for, for years and now they're stepping into monthly giving. I always love having kind of additional communications when somebody's new. So whether it's a letter from the president or CEO of the organization, or even just somebody who's a notable donor. We had
Mhm.
this is going to date me, but we used to when we worked with a mission and rescue mission in Los Angeles, human services charity. We used to send new donor thank you letters from William Shatner,
Oh, well,
uh, Mr. William Shatner. For
yeah.
those who are old enough to know, the actor,
Mhm.
Mr. Star Trek, or and anyways, because he was like a fan, a donor, loved the organization, and we were like, I didn't ask this question, but somebody at some point said, "Mr. Shatner, would you actually be willing to let us send a letter on your behalf saying, 'Hey, I understand that you recently,
Cool.
gave.' So we want to affirm, but we also want to do that on an ongoing basis." Because that's the piece that I think organizations miss is they think, well, I thanked you once and maybe I'll send you a newsletter, but a newsletter doesn't necessarily mean it's an affirmation. The stories about you or about
Mm.
what you're doing it's not the same as a thank you. You talk about those milestone, cards. I'd say, hey, what would it look like to send one of those every year to every donor or, like not wait for 10 years to, start mailing those. And there are ways to do that today. By the way, as an aside, Aaron, you and I talk about how you're responsible for the program, but that's also tens of thousands of donors. And so um, one of the most impressive programs I've seen, and this was actually a mid-level program, not a sustainer program, but the lesson will be interesting, was the folks at St. Jude
Mhm.
talked about how they handled their mid-level program, and they actually had technically one rep for 6,000 mid-level donors.
Wow.
Now, do that math. Like that portfolio, she wasn't going to be like calling them, right? But what they
Yeah.
did was they had one rep who was like the face of the mid-level program, for lack of a better term. They didn't call it that publicly, but then she had 3, I think 3 people that worked with her. So it was actually a team, but she was sort
Sure.
of the face of it. And then they had all sorts of automations and like, systems to basically be able to treat those 6,000 donors like mid-level. So I think we need to be able to do the same for our
Yeah.
monthly donors.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we've been talking about too, like, how do we continue to just improve that personal connection, that one touch, and do that more, and not
Yeah.
just in those, like, more infrequent instances.
Yeah. So I would say affirm and on an ongoing basis. Engage is the second piece. What are some ways that we can invite people into participation with the organization? And that can look differently. Again, I don't mean like send them a video that they can click on and they technically engage because they clicked the button. I mean,
Right.
like, invite them to respond. One of my favorites for charities is, especially when they're new, say, tell me your story. Like, why did you choose to give?
Mhm.
A thank you call where that is a similar question, right? Can be great. For
Yeah.
faith based organizations, is there any way we can pray for you? Like there's a lot of different ways to engage. Another couple favorites are to actually invite them. A lot of organizations, I have one charity we worked with that does these kind of vision trips. They're usually for major donors, but we talked about their monthly donors and we talked
Yeah.
about the value monthly donors, and they actually did an invite to their upcoming vision trip to their monthly donors. So they already had a trip planned. It was mostly major donors, but they thought let's invite sustainers. They actually had a sustainer join the trip who was $100 a month sustainer who after the trip wrote $100,000 check.
Wow.
So that
That's
worked out,
incredible.
right? And it's not just about that, but it's about even just the fact that they offered to engage and
They were
invited these
invited.
people, right? So
Yeah.
that's the engage piece. And then the last piece I always say is to appeal, to actually ask for additional gifts. And a lot of organizations can be a little bit nervous about like, well, they're already giving monthly. We shouldn't ask them for more. Well, in my experience, they're some of the most faithful additional gift givers, especially in your situation with the disaster
Yeah.
relief. Like, how are we inviting them to participate? Now, we may version that emergency package that says, as a faithful footsteps in, faith donor, we understand you are with us day in and
Yeah.
day out. And, you know, and so we acknowledge that, but we also are willing to ask. Bonus idea. I also worked with a charity where we knew we had elder donors on a fixed income. So we
Mhm.
actually did an age append on the file, and we had a special flag for what we called elder donors. And we had a variation
Okay.
of our strategies for our elder donors because we know, and we've learned this from people who are specialists in plan giving. Russell James and I are friends. Russell's written more books than I can ever hope to write on. In this case, on plan giving. One of the things he talks about is so many donors don't ultimately give a planned gift to the organization they've been giving to for decades because in the last years of life, all they get is just upgrade asks, and no relationship. And then they go to a fixed income, their giving goes down or stops at some point, and then the organization basically loses track of them. And so what are
Interesting.
we doing with our faithful donors to stay in relationship with them? And so with this elder donor strategy, we would modify the copy. Like we would say, "Hey, I understand that you can't give every time, we
Yeah.
send you a letter, but we wanted to make sure you knew what the organization was up from." That's not classic the direct marketing, right? Don't give them an out, right? But we knew these donors were a different type of
Yeah.
donor, and we wanted to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, the biggest thing that I've learned, just in my time doing this work is just continuing to learn about the donors, what they are, that history, that is special data that we have in terms of, like, these they have, like, hit a certain age, they've, now moved on to a fixed income and just helping us to be able to then steward them even better because of this information that we know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do we have time for one more? Do you have one more topic?
Yeah, okay, so this is another one, specifically about retention. So, what does best in-class retention look like in today's environment? And how much are organizations, truly underinvesting in it compared to acquisition? What do donors want? What do they do
Yeah.
do not
Well,
want?
it's
For specifically
interesting.
for like a program like ours.
I feel like retention, especially in conversations like this, right? It's like when we're in the industry, retention is such a great conversation. It's super fun, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. So, as a percentage of investment, frankly, like dollars spent, it doesn't have to be that big a percentage of investment.
Mhm.
But there are some very strategic things that we can do. Number one, just simply churn prevention. What are we doing in
Mm,
terms of our payment processes? Because most churn, by the way, has nothing to do with donor intent. I got a text 2 days ago, Aaron, and I'm embarrassed to say this out loud, but, let's be honest here. I got a text from a friend, who we've supported, who lives in
mhm.
Southern India, and we've, partnered with them and does some really incredible work, and he said this is a friend too, so, like, I know him. And he's like, "Hey, I noticed that you haven't been giving in a while. Would you like, is everything okay?" Kind of a semi awkward message. And I was like, immediately, my heart was like, "Oh shoot, what happened?" Because I
Yeah.
didn't intentionally do anything. Turns out my last gift, as we record this, was almost 6 months ago. That's not.
Wow.
That's that no donor intent there. I can tell you. Like I feel terrible
Mhm.
right now. I've reset up a gift now and all that kind of stuff. But so what are we doing on the churn prevention side, that what we call involuntary churn? And then, yes, what are we doing to affirm and engage and appeal to our clients to our donors on an ongoing basis? And then I think the last piece, as I think about retention, is what are we doing to uh, when people do get to that point of decision? Number one, at that moment, like, are we offering them alternative options. Did you know you can actually lower your gift amount or you can pause your gift, which is also practical. But what are we doing in that moment? I'll give you one other example. I won't name the charity because it was another negative example, but we had given to a charity for more than a decade. I think, yeah, like closer to 15 years. And
Mm.
um, long story short, I won't share the details. We decided to voluntarily stop giving. Wasn't anything super negative. It just wasn't in our, the top charities. And so, but as somebody who does this work, I thought this will be interesting. So I called in, and it was like surprising to me how efficient the process was. And I don't mean that all
Mm.
positively. Like the person was
Sure.
kind, but they were like, "What's your name? What's your address? Okay, all right, you're canceled. Anything else I can help you with?" And I'm like, I've been giving for 14 years. You could like
Yeah.
maybe say thanks so
Thank
much, or
you.
like, is there anything like maybe I should get a note in the mail? I don't know. I don't know. But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
kind of felt bad. And I didn't anticipate that because I was just kind of like, "Ah, I gotta call this thing in." But I kind of expected more, you know?
Yeah,
So
absolutely, and I think that's, again, what we talked about, just appreciating the donor and acknowledging how much commitment they provided over the years.
yeah. Yeah. I love it. Well, thank you, by the way, for being willing to turn the table. Maybe I'll just give you another episode, Aaron, and you can just ask me questions. I love my favorite thing to do and when I'm speaking is like, okay, I'll talk for 20 minutes and then can we do 40 minutes of ask me anythings because those are where the real fun is. So thank you
Yeah,
for playing.
this has been great, Dave. I appreciate it, and, it's I love working at CRS. I mean, this is such a passion of mine, and like I've shared throughout the episode, our donors are amazing, and I hope, other people that are in this space that get to work on monthly giving programs, that get to work, in mission, driven organizations you know, that they get to be able to hear these amazing stories from their donors too, that they get to improve their program, that they, ultimately get to be able to serve more people around the world.
I love it. I love it. Okay, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Before we do, where can people find more about CRS? Where can they find you? Footsteps in Faith. Like, where would you send them?
Yeah, people can check out crs.org.
Oh, that makes it easy.
Super simple.
Okay. Okay. Last question is what gives you hope about faithful, sustainable generosity?
I think everything we just talked about, having an incredible program like Footsteps in Faith, having an opportunity for people to live out their faith, for people to live out something that's bigger than themselves. It has just been incredible watching this program grow, learning about the people that have been part of it since, well before my time. And there are so many amazing people in the world that care for others. We talked about a lot of the funding loss last year. So much hope came from supporters that wanted to help and seeing helpers step up, seeing people that were just so committed to helping the poor and vulnerable. And at the end of the day, that's what CRS is about, providing dignity to all people.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you, Aaron, for joining us, and just appreciate all the work that you're doing from thinking about even your upbringing, right, and the model that your parents set for you, and I hope we can do the same for generations to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking of my own little one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sustainable Giving Podcast. I hope you found the information helpful and that you're able to walk away with insights that you can use to start building a steady stream of recurring revenue for your organization. For even more resources to help you build a thriving recurring giving program, go online to sustainablegiving.org. That's sustainablegiving.org. And lastly, if a leader comes to mind that you think would benefit from this episode, would you do me a favor? Would you share this episode with them? Just that little act could be the difference they need to start growing sustainable recurring giving for their own organization. Until next time, thanks for joining us.